Today's lecture is on morphophonemic analysis. This lecture assumes that the learners are familiar with the preliminaries of phonology and morphology in linguistics. Basics of morphology. Morphology is the branch of linguistics that studies the structure of words. There are many interactions, often complex, between phonological form and morphological structure. For the first test, it is useful to make use of the term morpheme, defined as the smallest linguistic unit that bears a meaning. One can often break up a word into its component morphemes by peeling up one morpheme at a time, like this: unidentifiable plus et, identifiable, identify plus able, identify, ident, iffy, to associate with an identity. These stages of decomposition seen above can all be justified by appealing to other words that have the same pattern. For example, the division of unidentifiability into unidentifiable plus et is supported by parallel examples like obscurity, purity, and obesity, and similarly for the other stages: unclear, unwilling, syllable, vegetable, classify, personify. Morphemes are not the same as phonemes. A phoneme is the smallest linguistic unit that can distinguish meaning, whereas a morpheme is the smallest linguistic unit that has a meaning. Phonemes. Phonemes are the linguistically contrastive or significant sounds or sets of sounds of a language. Such a contrast is usually demonstrated by the existence of minimal pairs or contrast in identical environment, CIE. Minimal pairs are pairs of words which vary only by the identity of the segment, another word for a single speech sound, at a single location in the word. As for example, mat and cat. Here, at portion remains constant, but the change of the sounds ma and ka makes the difference in their meanings. Allophones. Allophones are the linguistically non-significant variants of each phoneme. In other words, a phoneme may be realized by more than one speech sound, and the selection of each variant is usually conditioned by the phonetic environment of the phoneme. Occasionally, allophone selection is not conditioned but may vary from person to person and occasion to occasion. For example, one may pronounce paper, paper. Alternations. A morpheme is said to alternate when it appears in different forms in different contexts. This is a common pattern in languages. Alternation results because the phonological rules enforce their demands on the output of the morphology. The norm, in fact, is that a morpheme will not have a constant pronunciation. The morphology of a language frequently places morphemes in different phonological contexts, and when this happens, the outcome that is demanded by the phonological rules is often different. The difference that results are sometimes subtle, sometimes drastic. We turn next to the task of characterizing allophones as a variants of a single abstract phoneme. A widely adopted theoretical approach in phonology is to characterize the phoneme by setting up an abstract level of representation called the underlying representation, also called the phonemic representation, underlying form, or base form. The idea is that phonemes have an essential characteristic form which is altered in particular context by the rules of the phonology, applying in a derivation. In a system of this kind, it is rational to adopt as the underlying representation of the phonemes its elsewhere allophone. The elsewhere allophone is the allophone that is not affiliated with any particular context, but rather is a sound that appears when no other spatial context is met. The phonological derivation starts out with the underlying form, and rules apply to derive from it the various allophones in their appropriate context. If no rule is applicable, the underlying form emerges unaltered as the output of the phonology. Morphophonemic rules. A morphophonemic rule has the form of a phonological rule but is restricted to a particular morphological environment. Morphophonemic rules are sensitive to their environment, unlike phonological rules. Whenever morphological information is required to specify the environment for an allophonic rule, the rule is morphophonemic. Examples. The prefix in has the allomorphs il and ir. In plus responsible, irresponsible. In plus logical, illogical. The rules that n before l converted to l, n before a converted to ra are not phonological rules in English. However, if they were, the prefixes an and non would also exhibit this regular pattern, but they do not. Unresponsive, unresponsive. Unlimited, unlimited. Non-retroactive, non-retroactive. Non-lethal, non-lethal. Therefore, there must be a morphophonemic rule which determines the allophones il and ir to the prefix in. Procedure for morphophonemic analysis. Examine the data, consulting the glosses, and make a provisional division of the forms into phonemes. Find each morpheme that alternates and locate all of its allomorphs. Within each allomorph, locate the particular segment or segments that alternate. Considering the logical possibilities, set up the underlying representations show that all the allomorphs of each morpheme can be derived from a single underlying representation by general phonological rules. Pre-processing the data, phonemization. It is almost always easier to do morphophonemic analysis with data that are already expressed as phonemes, so it is advisable first to reduce the data to phonemes. 2. Morpheme division. The next step is to break up the forms into their component morphemes. A potential complication is that phonological alternations may obscure this division. In the hard cases, one must try more than one possibility for placing the hyphens, ultimately selecting the choice that yields a working analysis. As the words are divided into morphemes, it is usually also possible to state and order the rules of morphology that are active. Setting up underlying representations. As with morpheme division, the problem of choosing underlying representation often involves considering more than one hypothesis, with the final choice defended by its leading to a working analysis. The following strategy is often helpful. Suppose segment A alternates with segment B in the data. In such a case, we may consider two possibilities. 1. Segments showing A to B alternations are underlyingly A, which is converted to B in certain contexts by one or more phonological rules. 2. Segments showing A to B alternations are underlyingly B, which is converted to A in certain contexts by one or more phonological rules. In other words, always consider both directions. To give a concrete example, if we were analyzing Chimuini, it's a variety of Swahili language spoken in Somalia, we'd find many instances of long vowels alternating with short, as in Zosoma to read, Zosomoa to be read. We'd consider the possibility that such cases are underlyingly long vowels read shom and consider shortening rules, this turns out to be correct, as well as the possibility that these are underlyingly short vowels. Read some and consider lengthening rules. 4. Constructing underlying representations under a particular hypothesis. Assuming that we have picked a particular direction for the rules A to B or B to A and are trying it out, the next step is to construct underlying representations. Here is the recommended procedure. Segments that do not alternate can normally be assumed to be phonemically identical in their underlying representations to their surface representations. This presupposes, as already noted, that phonemic analysis is already accomplished, so any positional allophones will already appear in their underlying form. For segments that alternate, follow the hypothesis you made about underlying forms, implementing it consistently through the data. Thus, if we are assumed that an alternation A to B found in a particular context is underlain by A, we should set up A in the underlying representation for all such alternations in that context. We should be sure that the underlying representation of each morpheme is uniform throughout its paradigm. This is a basic hypothesis of the theory we are assuming. In our example, exomoa, under the hypothesis that the rule is a shortening rule, this principle forces us to set up the underlying representations zoom for the root and o for the invariantly long passive suffix. Working out the rules. When you have a suitable set of hypothesized underlying forms, it is helpful to arrange them in a row, aligning their corresponding surface forms underneath them as follows. If you follow it, you will understand what is happening there. To read, zozoma. To be read, zosomoa. To stop for, kurebelan. Rules added, zosoma, zosomoa, kurebelana. It is then a matter of coming up with a rule system that will derive the bottom row from the top. If we get stuck doing this, we can try collecting the local environments for the sounds that change as described above for phonemic analysis. 6. A clue for choosing underlying representations. When we are deciding whether to set up underlying A and derive B from it or vice versa, there is often a clue in the data to guide ourselves, namely a contextually limited contrast. In the present case, we know that while vowel length is phonemic in Chimoini, only short vowels are allowed when more than 3 syllables from the end of a phrase or when a long vowel follows. Such limitations are a strong clue that there must be a rule that wipes out the contrast in these environments. Another way of saying the same thing is don't analyze in a direction opposite to that of a neutralization. When we analyze Chimoini with shortening, our analysis fits in well with the contextually neutralized distribution of long and short vowels in the language. If, however, we try to analyze Chimoini with lengthening, the phonological distribution will stymie us. The following quadruplet of forms should make the point clear. Just try to understand them with attention. The top row of forms show us an alternation between U and U, the long and short vowel, which we earlier analyzed, assuming underlying U and the neutralizing rule pre-long shortening. It is plain that pre-long shortening is neutralizing, since the passive form zakula, zakuloa is identical to the passive zakula, meaning to grow. we had wrongly chosen underlying short u for the root meaning exact would be defeated no matter what lengthening rule we tried. It would be unable to derive Zakula for extract and Zakula for grow, since these two forms would have the same underlying representation. If we go deeper into morphophonemic analysis, we find different orders for application of such rules. That is, they do not apply simultaneously but following different order in different situations. This is called rule ordering. Rule ordering clearly plays a major role in morphophonemic analysis. 4 terms about rule ordering that are commonly used by phonologists are feeding, bleeding, counterfeeding, and counterbleeding. Rule A feeds rule B when A is ordered before B, and A creates novel configuration to which B may apply. Rule A bleeds rule B when A is ordered before B and A removes configurations to which B could otherwise have applied. Rule A counterfeits rule B when A is ordered after B and A creates novel configurations to which B could have applied if A had been applied before B. Rule A counterbleeds rule B when A is ordered after B and A would have removed configurations to which B applies had A applied first. These 4 terms, though tricky to learn to use accurately, continue to be employed by phonologists because they provide a clear classification of the reasons why rules have to be ordered. Table below may be of help in studying these terms. Summary of the ordering terminologies.